Successful men typically want to be like other successful men, right? They want to be accepted by other successful men. This is why we see successful men typically congregating in the same areas, getting same job positions, going to similar conferences, right? Is they want to be in their tribe. So again, what happens if that tribe has now normalized conquesting after women, right? Getting their attention, getting their approval, right? Having them be attracted to us, having them want us, having them want to sleep with us, right? If that's seen as valuable, right? If that's a testament to you being a more desirable man or a successful man because you've won their attention. One of the biggest reasons why my podcast has a very different energy and kind of flavor to it compared to many of the other sex addiction podcasts is because I really want to attack the shame aspect of this. And I'm not alone on this. We all know, and the research supports it, right? Shame is the recovery killer, right? It's the reason that kind of the whole concept of 12-step was invented with substance addiction. Was what we found were these addicts, substance addicts, back in the 50s and 60s, right? They felt so much shame from society that they just kind of stayed in this relapse cycle forever, right? They would just flounder in sobriety and never actually enter recovery, right? And it was because of the shame. Well, we've made a ton of progress with substance addiction. I would say, a substance addict can post online and say, hey, 1 year sober from alcohol, 1 year sober from heroin, and there's going to be 500 comments of support, right? Whereas if a sex addict says, hey, 1 year without cheating on my wife and hiring prostitutes, I don't know if he's going to get any positive compliments, probably just negative ones, okay? And I'm sensitive to that because I really dislike hierarchies when it comes to pathologies, because we're just dealt the cards we're dealt, and then we have the pathology that we have, right? Somebody who has anorexia and bulimia, then those are the cards they dealt, and they now need to overcome that pathology, right? Somebody who has developed a very kind of self-centered, grandiose, or narcissistic way of looking at the world, then that's the cards that they were dealt from their childhood, and now they need to overcome some of these traits that they've developed, right? It's no different with sex addiction, right? These are the cards that we have been dealt, and we now need to overcome them. And so to judge one person more than another person, it's really unfair, and I think it keeps people trapped in their pathology, right? Because we can't choose the cards that we're dealt. We can't choose what our brain does. If I could tell you, so every single guy in my program would give anything. And some of these guys have a ton of money, and they would give all their money up to have had this not happen. Right? That's how much they wish they could change this. But what we do know is it will not change in the presence of shame. So I want to speak to this. The reason that so many of my podcasts are really speaking to how normal this is to reduce shame. And I think sometimes it can come off as not being necessarily partner sensitive, right? The fact that I'm talking about how normal the use of, objectifying women and using them really for self gain, that can sound very crass, and it can sound very definitely has some asshole energy to it. But again, remember, there's a big difference between normal and something that's healthy, or something that we're promoting, right? Remember, all normal means is that people are doing it, right? The people who you consider your social cohort are doing it. And if enough of them are doing it, then it's normal, right? So in a lot of successful men, they'll golf, or they'll play, they'll have some sort of like club that they join in their adulthood, right? And so it would be considered normal for a successful man or an executive or somebody to golf, or maybe they windsurf, or maybe they typically will, not always, but they'll commonly engage in a very expensive hobby. Right. And that's normal amongst their cohort, right? When you look in their cohort, they're going on expensive vacations, they have expensive hobbies, etc. Right? So that's how normal works. It's just when enough of them do it, it becomes normal. So when I'm saying that it's become normal, that especially in successful male circles, that men will desire the attention of other women, to feel like they are accomplished, to feel like they've made it, that's normal amongst successful men. All I'm saying is that enough successful men believe that it's become normal. But again, normal does not mean okay. right? Normal just means that enough people did it to the point where it has now become normal. Right, one of my favorite studies that they did to talk about this is the shopping carts. I don't know if you guys have heard this. I can't remember what university did it, but they were in a van and they had cameras set up and they were watching for people who left their shopping cart out and did not return it back to the shopping cart kind of storage rack. And the first day they did it in a Walmart parking lot, and the first day they just let people leave their shopping carts out, and they counted how many shopping carts. I can't remember what it was. I think it was above 600 shopping carts that were just left out in the parking lot. Well, the next day they came back and they did it different. Every time a shopping cart was left out, somebody from their research team ran over and grabbed the shopping cart, put it back in the shopping cart storage rack. What they found was only, I think it was 40 or 50 shopping carts were left out that day, down from 600. And what that study's showing was that when something is normal and convenient, then people will do it, right? And so in the case of the first day, right, when there was shopping carts that were left out all over, more and more people were like, I don't want to walk back. I'll just leave my shopping cart here. I'm not gonna mess with it. There's tons of them out already. You see what I'm saying? They noticed that there were tons of shopping carts that were already left out. So then they left theirs out as well because they didn't want to walk all the way back out in the heat to put their shopping cart back. Whereas on the next day, when they put them back, people felt guilty for being the first person to leave their shopping cart out. Now, not all people, because there were still 46 people who decided they didn't care. But it went down from 600. So my point of bringing this up, and I talk about this so much on my podcast, is when something's normal, we don't really feel like we're necessarily doing anything wrong. We just feel like this is what we need to do. Now, yes, are these men hiding it? Right. So to some degree they know. But again, I think a lot of the times what's going on in their brain is not that this shouldn't be being done. It's that they can't do it without hiding it. You guys hear the difference between that, right? So if something was actually truly considered abnormal, these men then would feel guilty and have a desire to not do it because it's like, this is not a normal behavior. But then if we feel like it's normal, but we can't do it, we need to hide it. Then do you see what I'm saying? So we're still doing something normal, but it's normal to hide it. And that's why so many of my podcasts really talk about this cultural aspects of how this has happened. Because what do we know? People want to be normal. They want to fit in. They want to be like the other. In the case of my podcast, right? It's geared towards successful men, right? Successful men typically want to be like other successful men, right? They want to be accepted by their successful men. This is why we see successful men typically congregating in the same areas, getting same job positions, going to similar conferences, right? Is they want to be in their tribe. So again, what happens if that tribe has now normalized conquesting after women, right? Getting their attention, getting their approval, right? Having them be attracted to us, having them want us, having them want to sleep with us, right? If that's seen as valuable, right? If that's a testament to you being a more desirable man or a successful man because you've won their attention, right? Then that has become normalized. But again, normal doesn't mean okay. Normal just means that your particular cohort that you want to be considered normal with has decided to normalize this behavior. So let's bring this back to shame. Why am I bringing this up? Because this is probably one of the things that I see the most that really hinders recovery in my recovery groups is there's still shame going on around the behavior, right? They're judging themselves for what they've done, right? Or they feel very judged by their wife, or they feel very, occasionally even judged by their therapy team for what they've done, right? When in reality, again, kind of coming back to the beginning of this podcast, right? We're dealt the cards we're dealt. And so, to me, that's where we walk this line between how much kind of self-forgiveness do we have and how much is too much, right? And then how much is too much shame. And I just want to clear that up, right? Is there such a thing as a healthy amount of shame? And is there such a thing as too much self-forgiveness? So I want to speak to that real quick. I'm going to start with the shame one. Is there such thing as too much shame? Absolutely. Is any shame too much? Yes. Any shame is too much. We don't shame somebody who has anorexia, which is a very prevalent process addiction, and eating disorders are quite similar actually to sex addiction. Right? Do we shame them? I can't believe how skinny you look. You look disgusting. You need to go get you. No, we don't do that, right? Do we shame alcoholics? Right? If your family member or a child of yours develops an alcohol problem or a substance problem, no, we shower them with love. We encourage them, right? We show them grace, understanding, right? We show them compassion, right? And then we try to show up with curiosity, right? How did this happen? Why? How did you start making such decisions? But again, we don't see that tenderness within sex addiction. Now, I want to I just want to speak back to the partners real quick. I get it. This is the worst thing that has ever happened to you. It is unfair. A lot of it is pretty gross. I mean, my wife is very offended by, now that we've gone through this. My wife is very offended and triggered by male culture and how they view women and how they talk about women and this overemphasis on their appearance, right? And it's not just male culture; it's also really off-putting to her the media. And how women are constantly shown as, you look at the cover of magazines and how they're shown on the cover of magazines. You look at advertisings and media, cheerleaders, right? When the ideal woman and their objectification of their bodies is front and center on endless amounts of pretty much everywhere you look in our world, right? And this normalization aspect, right? So what I'm saying is, how much shame is too much shame? Any. We don't need to shame. We don't need to do that. There's no benefit to that. Actually, in fact, what we know, the research shows, is it blocks recovery, right? And this includes shameful conversations. But I'm also talking to the men here, guys. You got to be careful shaming yourselves for what you've done, right? Remorse is far more healthy, right? Remorse is, man, I wish I could go back and have done it different. Gosh, if I could just have a time machine, I would go back and I would not have made any of those decisions, right? That's healthy. That's healthy. Shame is not, right? Right, shame is a rotten feeling. It's going to prevent you from recovering. So let's go to the other side. Self-forgiveness. Is there too much self-forgiveness? I'm going to answer that carefully because I'm all about self-forgiveness, and I think it's one of the most powerful things you can do in recovery. It was right for me. It was when I got into a really strong, lasting recovery. Was when I actually really started to forgive myself. But here's where I want to be careful: is there's a big difference between forgiveness and just simply like trying to not shame yourself. There's a big difference. And I think the guys who try to not shame themselves, that's not self-forgiveness, right? The guys who just try to not shame themselves, those guys actually may slip because of because of how much they're, in many ways, they're minimizing the size of what they've done. Right. But but to go back to my question, right, is there such thing as too much self-forgiveness to the point where the addict is actually not, or the compulsive guy is not, really policing his compulsivity enough to the point where he actually is at risk of relapse? No, I think endless amounts of self-forgiveness is great, but it needs to be real self-forgiveness. It cannot just be trying to see yourself in a good light and ignoring some of the hard truths. And again, this is why it's so important that you are in a recovery group who really knows you. It's important that you're in a recovery group who calls you out, right? And it's important you're in a recovery group where, you're making sure that you are in fact trying to forgive yourself rather than minimize, or rather than just try to see yourself in a positive light without changing. And I know that sounds like, the way I'm describing it right here sounds really easy. Like a lot of guys would listen to that and be like, "Oh yeah, Roland, I'm not doing that." Like you'd be surprised though. You'd be surprised. There's a lot of guys who, in their heads, they really think like, man, they need to cut me some slack. Like I'm trying, and they are in this mindset that like that what's being done to them is unfair. And they really truly believe it's unfair. I've been one of those guys. And it's not until your recovery group looks at it and they go, I don't know. I think what she's asking of you is actually quite fair and very realistic, right? Right. So you need other people to check your perception of reality, right? Because again, humans have a very strong desire to see themselves in a positive light. Right. And I would say high achieving men struggle with this even more, right? high achieving men like myself, we struggle with a lot of pride and grandiosity, and our image is so important. And in many ways, a lot of what we do from a leadership standpoint and entrepreneurial standpoint, our image is important because we live in a very image focused world, and so our image is absolutely important for a lot of the things that we do, a lot of the good things that we do. But what we have to be very careful of is our self-importance and our exaggerated kind of protection around our image, is that harming us? And I think for at least high-achieving men, it can be really hard to see. I mean, the reason I am still seeing a therapist every single week, too, and I still go to intensives multiple times a year, is what I have realized is life is a series of discovering things that you cannot see on your own. Right, and having somebody else, help you see pathologies or just different things that you're doing that are harming you. Right, so have a good accountability group. That way you can double check your thought process. So, in conclusion, what am I trying to get at with this episode? Again, there is this fine line between wanting the behaviors to be bad and having this, because again, there is a lot of like justice and vengeance, and this is so wrong, and what was done to the partners is so unfair, right? So there is a lot of that, and again, we want to find this happy medium of being like, yeah, that is unfair, and I can't, and it is so sad that so many men are doing this to their wives, right? So we want to stay there and stay present with that, because that is tragic. And a lot of these women are never the same again. And how unfair is that, right? So we want to sit with that, right? That's partner sensitivity. And we want to be careful that we don't shame ourselves for being one of the guys who participated. Because I always say this, every single human behavior, every single action we make is justified in our little world. It is justified. In that moment, we have somehow... in a lot of ways, in a delusion, we have justified that behavior. We have said that is normal, or we deserve it, or well, that's worth it as long as I don't get caught and I won't get caught, etc. Whatever the narrative is in your brain, right? That crazy, delusional, addictive narrative, right? Whatever that narrative is, right? That's the thing that we need to attack. That's your recovery work, right? Because that narrative is the reason you cheated on your wife. That narrative that ruined your life, not you, right? And that's the difference between shame and something that's unproductive versus looking at it in a very healthy way, right? Right. What we know is humans are a victim of their environment, right? The mentors, the TV shows they watch, friends, right? Our environment changes us, and it alters the ways that we make decisions. It alters the way that we think, and it alters the way we see the world. Right, so if you are seeing the world in a way that is harming your life and the future that you want, and harming the people you love, and harming yourself, right, what we need to figure out is, what did I learn that made me think that acting this way was okay, or I was going to get what I wanted, right? And that's the recovery work. And I hope this helps, because I see so many men who want the things that they did to be awful and disgusting and gross, and I get it, they are. But I think we need to be very, very careful, and I think focusing on that is actually a distraction and actually keep you in bad recovery. I think you would get a far bigger ROI than focusing on, how did this happen? How did I think this was okay? How did I think this was normal? Because that pathway is far less shaming. What do we know about shame? It's a recovery killer.